Become part of the change towards a regenerative future. Our aim is to promote self-empowerment and educate our course participants about regeneration, so that people all over the world can redesign their communities. Look deeper inside our programs and courses to find your way within your community to transform the world. Sustainability is at the heart of all of our courses and projects. Sustainability design education is our mission. Join our programs, support us, and let's fly together.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and a huge welcome to this very special Gaia Education Masterclass with the legendary Dr. Vandana Shiva. Thank you so much for joining us today. Wonderful. So my name is Sally Bagal. I am the co-CEO of Gaia Education, and we also have with us Jan Teixeira from our e-learning team. The two of us have been collecting up your questions from the forum and emails that we will be presenting to Dr. Shiva today. For those of you who are new to masterclasses with Gaia Education, the aim is to ask leaders in the field of regeneration to talk a little more deeply with us about the system changes that are needed and how we can contribute on the ground wherever we are across the world. Most of you, I'm sure, know Dr. Shiva and her work very, very well, and have probably read her books or seen the film, The Seeds of Vandana Shiva, that we were really pleased to be able to offer you in December. But there might be some of you here today who are new to this topic. So as an introduction, let me tell you that Dr. Shiva is a world-renowned and award-winning environmental thinker, an activist, feminist, philosopher of science, writer, and science policy advocate. She founded the Research Foundation for Science, Technology and Ecology, which addresses the most significant problems of ecology of our times, and Navdanya, the globally renowned movement in defense of native seeds, biodiversity and small farmers in the face of genetically modified crops, harmful pesticides, seed patenting, and all the other awful results of the dominant paradigm of highly destructive agricultural practices. Her tenacious spirit, her many books and grassroots campaigns have seen her become a defender of the voices so often not heard in the march of globalization, and she is seen as a true advocate for Earth's democracy. So thank you once again for joining us, Dr. Shiva, and how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Great.
Happy to join you all.
Yeah, we're all delighted. We've got about over 900 people signed up, all eager to hear from you. So thank you so much for making the time, and we know how busy you are. The format of this webinar, as we say, is that we will ask questions that we have already been fielding, but we will leave 15 minutes at the end for those who want to add their questions as a result of the live discussion. So have a think about that, and you can post it in the comments section that's already filling up with lots of greetings from all over the world: Italy, Portugal, Brazil, Scotland. So yes, keep those questions coming, and we'll reach as many of them as we can. Okay, so let's begin. Over to Jan for the first question.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure and a joy to be here. And the first question is about the movie, The Seeds of Vandana Shiva. It's a very inspiring and powerful movie. And the question is, how was the process of putting it together? And are you feeling the impact of the movie already in the world?
Well, I didn't make that movie. Yeah. It's made by the Becketts, by Jim Beckett and Camilla Beckett. And Jim had been filming me for more than, I think, more than 15 years, because he was part a process, on they used to be called symposia on the sea, on science, environment, and religion, organized by the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church. And I would be invited for this. It was an amazing experience, the Mediterranean, the Amazon, the Danube, the Baltic. They were to have done the Ganges, but sadly Maria, who was organizing it, had passed away, and it never happened. So at a certain point, I think Jim Beckett suddenly realized that, the work I was doing, plodding along, the everyday work that is so necessary, at a certain point he realized, it was having an impact. And then he wanted to make a film, and I was very reluctant. I kept saying, no, I don't want to be subject of a film. I'd been asked earlier for a film on staying alive. And I said, no, I will take you to the women who inspire me. You make a film on them. And Amrit Beach was made on that, the perennial seed. So I was reluctant all along. I mean, and they'd come every year, they'd come and interview. And I said, you're back again. and then they started to show me the rough cuts. And I realized they had worked very, very hard. And the reason I appreciate what they've done is they have brought the last 30 years, 40 years of important human historical events to life. We'd have forgotten about Bhopal. They brought it to life. My own trajectory shifted when the Bhopal disaster took place and the Punjab violence took place. And I said, no, I have to look at what's going on in agriculture. And they've made that come alive. They made the suicides of the farmers, be communicated with people. And of course, my childhood, my forests, my involvement with Chipko. But the real important thing is, the history of globalization, the history of commodification, the evolution of the climate debate, in the early days. They were not even talking about agriculture. And now the billionaires want to use hyper-industrial agriculture with no farmers and no care for the soil, just more pesticides, more Roundup, more drones to spray faster. And I think the film is useful, especially for your generation, Jan, the generation that didn't live through those times. It makes those times come alive so that how have we inherited this moment? This moment of the growth of corporate power, the emergence of billionaires, the destruction of the planet on a very, very rapid state, also the rise of the movements. How do people organize to have power?
Yeah, it certainly does do that with the film. It marches through time to such major significant events. And one thing that is really striking is how fearless you seem in taking on these challenges in whatever way you can. And I think a lot of questions that we've been getting, especially from the younger people on the forum, is who are perhaps dealing with eco-anxiety as they really understand what's going on. And they wanted to know what keeps your fire burning in the face of one thing after another and such huge powers to take on. How do you deal with it?
Well, everything I've taken on, I had hoped my life would be the life of a quiet physicist. And, if the quantum puzzles had not been solved for 100 years, I could see that my entire life could be spent on puzzling quantum theory. And and it's the destruction of the forest that eventually, made me realize that I had to become an activist, and I joined the Chipko movement as a volunteer. Agriculture, what happened in Punjab, what happened in Bhopal. I said, why do so many millions of people have to die? And of course, later we realized that the costs of chemical farming is even higher. Biodiversity discussion started in my lifetime. And already 90% species are gone, largely because we are using chemicals in agriculture whose purpose is to kill plants. Roundup's design is to kill a plant, as they used to say in the negotiations, kills everything green. But everything green is what makes this planet run. It's the life of the plant with photosynthesis. the transformation of carbon dioxide into the carbohydrates that feed us, the oxygen that we breathe. So every issue I've taken on is when I've seen huge violence to society and nature, and unnecessary violence. And unnecessary because as a scientist, I always get into why are they doing this? And then I understand the propaganda. And propaganda is not science. And I guess what keeps my fire burning is my fire is the fire of the earth. You know, we talk about the 5 elements, and, you know, in India, we talk about the 5th element as space. But most cultures have the elements of the earth and water and air and fire. Yeah, that fire of the earth, the fire of the universe, that's in us too. And to be connected to a forest, to a river, to a seed, to someone who was poisoned with pesticide, to someone who got into debt and committed suicide, that fire is the fire of our oneness, of our interconnectedness. It's a fire of love. And you know, when you love deeply, then those who are causing the harm, you don't think of their size and their power. You merely think of the power you must grow to protect what you love.
Yeah. And reconnecting to that, yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Vandana. We were just part of a project here in Europe, supporting youth in reconnecting with nature and dealing with eco-anxiety. And we kept always coming back to reconnecting with nature and connecting with the 4 elements. And yeah, on that note, we wanna ask you, like, in your experience, what works best to shift people's worldviews once many times people are not connected? So we want to just, from your experience, like, how can we help to bring this reconnection with nature and so on? And also, how do you support people to reconnect to themselves, each other, and nature?
You know, this period of a mechanistic age, you know, the age of the machine, the age of disconnection, the age of separation, is also an age which got rid of experience and knowing in a living process, and reduced knowledge to torture. You know, as Bacon says it so clearly in his books, Francis Bacon, who's called the father of modern science, he says you've got to torture nature to get her secrets. And, you know, he was in charge of the witch hunts and the Inquisition. So that's all he knew about knowledge, how to torture. He talks about how you to make nature a slave, to force her to yield to your purpose. But the minute you're forcing a living system, the earth, Gaia, to your purpose, you've already stopped knowing, because you've stopped knowing the living system that you're dealing with. And the best way, I think, I'm sure each of you who's participating today, who's listening today, will realize that your shift came from an experience. Your shift came from seeing something. Your shift came from your personal experiential knowledge. And that's why the best way to make the transformation is, you know, we can write all the books, and I do write books, but argument is not a way to convince someone else. Someone who is convinced about their falsehoods will merely get reinforced more deeply if you try and question it and say there's another way. And ask me about the experience of how the poison cartel becomes more vicious each time we show what the harm they're doing. So, you know, go to nature. Turn nature into your teacher. Give up the insulation that has been built around us, that we are atoms separate from everything that gives us life, the tree that gives us breath, the soil that gives us food, the stream that gives us water. We wouldn't be alive without them. We wouldn't be healthy without the 100 trillion microbes that are within us, in our gut microbiome. So to be deeply aware about interconnectedness and to live that interconnectedness. And that's why what we've done, and so much of my life has evolved organically. Began with quantum theory of, I did my PhD on non-locality and non-separation in quantum theory. And then I joined the Chipko movement and I learned the non-separation between the forests and the rivers and the soil. And then I got involved in agriculture and realized the interconnectedness between the seed and the soil and the life. Both the biodiversity within the soil, the biodiversity of the plants and the biodiversity of insects and everything and how it hangs together in balance. So out of this has grown an Earth University, very much like your Gaia education. And I originally was just saving seeds by encouraging farmers to save seeds. And I realized, I'd say, well, we have 800 varieties of rice and people won't believe me. And I'd say, well, native rices are producing more than the Green Revolution varieties and they wouldn't believe. So I said, okay, we'll have a farm where we have all this so people can see, and they can stop being doubters. And so the farm grew as a seed-saving farm and has become a biodiversity sanctuary, but biodiversity teaches us. So our Earth University, we learn how nature works by co-creating with nature, of removing all the harm and giving all the love. That's all we have to do. Pull out everything that gives pain to the earth, remove the fossil fuels, remove the chemicals. And then nature does all that work anyway. She knows how to control pests. She knows how to renew fertility. And, our data is showing that there's much more fertility when we don't put fertilizers into the soil, when you give love. And, I have a book called Biodiversity, Agroecology, and Regenerative Agriculture, which I was asked to do by a publisher. And he said there's no textbook to teach organic farming. So I wrote this book on my 36 years of practice and research. And I would welcome, I'll make sure that, if you write to Earth University at navdanya.net, Earth University at navdanya.net, all of September, we do a course on return to the earth, on living seed, living soil, living food. Food is living. And living economies. How do we, through food, create living economies? And I hope some of you can come for this. But, Sally has my contacts, and I'll make sure that Sally receives the announcement for this course and circulates it to all of you. So learning from nature, learning from farmers, learning from elders, learning from indigenous people, learning from women, everyone who was treated as an outcast. Those who were put on the margins, indigenous people have no knowledge. The earth is dead. Women are a second sex. All of the people who were pushed aside, that is where the future seeds are being conserved. And that's where the future will be created.
Oh, that's beautiful. And yes, I will make sure to pass on that. Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva. It's interesting, the next question that we were going to ask you does feed into that, in the sense that, as you say, Earth University and Gaia Education and a growing group of alternative education providers, shall we say, are sort of coming more and more together and talking to each other. But we had quite a lot of questions about mainstream education, people despairing of it, whether from primary right up to higher education, and people talking about the knowledge control in higher education, for example, with patents and all the things that you talk so much about. And they were asking, how can they, as part of that system, have a breakthrough and start to have an influence of a more holistic, more connected form of education within the mainstream? Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I was part of that system. And I left when I was invited by the Ministry of Environment to do a study which it led to the closure of mines because the Supreme Court read our report, and then they said that if commerce destroys life, then commerce must stop because life must carry on. It's a very famous 1983 Doon Valley mining case. And then I realized that, if I could be full-time service to the earth and community, my time was being used much better. to be within the mainstream, and how do you still create openings for yourself personally, as well as for the communities you're part of. First, if you are part of a privileged learning system, an institution, you are privileged. Share some of that privilege with others. And the way I evolved it was, I evolved the idea of participatory action research. So, in positivist sort of mechanistic reductionist science and knowledge, everything is an object, including other people. They're objects to be observed from the top down. Whereas in a living system, every human being is living and alive and intelligent, and they are participating in the knowledge. In my view, plants and microbes are intelligent and are participating in the knowledge. So participatory action research means participating with communities, participating with nature's processes, action that you don't just sit in a detached way and objectify knowledge, but action means to participate in activity. And this then, action becomes the research, so that the divide between theory and practice and the hierarchies of different forms of knowledge, they dissolve. And I know it is possible because I've done it, but I know people are doing it everywhere. But for those who want to create alternative learning systems, I just want to share this with you. I think it's in the film, because Jim wanted to come and see this Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Ecology. Now, and when I left academics, my mother had said, when you want to leave a job, take the cow shed. Where I'm sitting right now, my mother used to have cows. And she used to spend a lot of time with them. And, they were her first family. And whenever, teenagers, you have to be rude to your parents, isn't it? Otherwise, you're not a teenager. And, she said, yeah, that's all you people can do. But my Krishna, my calf, only gives me love, and she'd walk down to the cow shed. So she had said, take the cow shed when you want to. And when she passed away, this is where I started the Research Foundation with very few resources, very, very few resources, nothing. And the way to, you talked about young people with eco-anxiety, but a lot of academics are constantly suffering anxiety, even though they're getting fat checks at the end of the month. They have all the best of, when I left university, I'm first said, what will happen to the library, because the library was, I've got 6 rooms full of books now, and I think they're books that you wouldn't find in university libraries anymore, because there's such censorship about knowledge. So, if you care enough to know, you care enough about those you want to know, whether it's human beings or plants or animals, a way is found. So let your passion and your love grow.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Vandana. And still, I think that also connects to education. Talking about interdisciplinary and systemic approach, and you mentioned, I saw in the movie that you mentioned Einstein as one of the persons that you feel inspired by, and we can see him in the background. The question is, could you speak more about this perception that is so different from mainstream and conventional science? Like, how can we apply these holistic systems to food systems, for example?
Yeah. Living systems are living. Living systems have relationships with other living systems. And any knowledge system that denies relationships and denies the whole is really ignorance. It might be fine to be able to put together, through a mechanical perspective, a machine. You can put together a car. Yes, you can, and it'll do fine. but you cannot engineer a plant. And that's why genetic engineering is an illusion. And because mechanistic science was put in place as part of colonialism, it was put in place as part of the rising capitalism, it was put in place to dominate. And therefore it gave up the first quality of science, which is discussion, debate, multiple points of view. And all true science are many, many parts. And out of that dialogue between different parts comes what becomes the received view about, yeah, it works like this, yeah. We thought it all works like machines, it works through Newtonian physics. And then we realize, no, the quantum explanations are much better, the quantum explanations of non-locality, of potential. So the fear, I see it as a fear of the holistic. It's not just a blindness and a denial, but that denial has a deeper root. And that is, it's the fear of anything alive and self-organized and autonomous. And that's why the attack it was horrendous. You know, the witch hunts were a little before the mechanistic philosophy, but it was the same process. The witch hunts were kill anyone who knows outside authority. You know, if you know that the plant is living and the church doesn't want you to have that knowledge, then the most learned, 9 million people were killed during the witch hunts, most of them women. It's a part of our history. We must remember again and again, because new forms of witch hunts start. And you see new forms of denial of the holistic today. I mean, look at the debate that took place during COVID. Total denial of the immunity of a living body. That anything living has immunity and resilience. And there was actually censorship on natural immunity. And now they're having to admit that natural immunity is the best defense. And natural immunity comes from food. And natural immunity comes from eating healthy. So, this domination and wanting to be in control is based on fear of that which you want to control. So it's based on fear of anything alive and everything free. Now, a plant and a seed is free. So there's fear of the seed, and so you must genetically engineer it and patent it. How do you deal with the attacks on holistic and system science? Is keep doing it. Keep doing. So the only true science is systems knowledge of how things hang together. And I would recommend very much to you, my dear friend, Fritz of Capra, who was also a quantum physicist, who wrote a book called Tao of Physics. But he's written a book called The Systems View of Life. And he's gone through the whole history of how science was made reductionist. And now, even though the dominant science is still reductionist, because that's the only way you can make money, that's the only way you can commodify nature, but there's emerging sciences everywhere. The emerging sciences of health, they're having to recognize that food and the gut microbiome is the central source of all healthy body. Exactly what ancient systems taught us. So, yeah, the more the attack comes on systems knowledge and holistic knowledge, the more you should seek in a holistic and interconnected way.
Yeah. Thank you. And yes, we had a webinar with Fritjof Capra a little while back that people should be able to see. And yes, he's kind of has a course at the moment that is thoroughly recommended for people who want to understand a bit more about systems thinking. I just wanted to ask you, Dr. Shiva, you often put this very much into the context of the dominance of the masculine over the feminine, and you talk a lot in subjects of ecofeminism about the resurgence of the feminine, and people were wanting to know a little bit if you could go into that a little bit more as to how you see that working.
Well, when I was writing Staying Alive, and my publishers, just like Jim and Camilla Beckett, kind of bullied me to participate in the film. My publisher bullied me into writing a book, and I said, no, I've given up academics. I'm not going to publish anymore. I'm not going to be part of a rat race. And she said, but writing can be very subversive. And, and she encouraged me. She'd heard me give a talk at the Women's Summit in Nairobi on women and environment. And she said, write a book on this. So I wrote Staying Alive. And the first issue was, why is it that women rise for the forest, for the river? And the second issue was, why do some people think that the forest is a timber mine? How come some people think the soil is an empty container that needs chemical fertilizers? So I hadn't read history of science, during my days of doing particle physics and quantum theory, but I went into the history of science and read every book. I read the Mr. Bacon's, and I read the Boyle's, and I read all of them. And Bacon wrote a book. As I said, he's the father of modern science, and the Royal Society is dedicated to making his masculine philosophy become the system of knowledge, the Royal Society of England, which became the hub of what will be called science. Bacon wrote a book, The Masculine Birth of Time. For him, knowledge in partnership, knowledge in dialogue was effeminate. Knowledge of domination and subjugation was the new masculine system. So, this whole issue of a patriarchal mode of knowing is stated by the founders of that paradigm. And as I mentioned earlier, the witch hunts were knowing in partnership. And it was being forbidden. You can't think of a plant as living. You can't think of a plant as healing. You can't think of waters as healing. And every one of these were the elements that were behind the witch hunts. So, who has the knowledge of healing plants? Where's the knowledge of saving seeds? It happens to be women, not because it's an activity that men can't do, but through colonialism and the rise of patriarchy, men were pulled into actions and activities related to war and related to markets. So the men in Africa worked on plantations and in the mines. And the women were left to take care of life, to somehow keep growing the food, to somehow keep fetching the water. And that's why when you turn around and say, okay, where's the knowledge? Where's the knowledge of the spring? Where's the knowledge of how the seed has to be protected and preserved and renewed? Women happen to be custodians of this. And of course, in Indian philosophy, there's a deeper there's a deeper reason, because our philosophy is based on the creative force of the universe is a feminine force. But it's not just India. Pachamama, Pachamama is a woman. She's the organizer of the universe for the people of the Andes. And if you go Gaia, you are doing Gaia education. Who's Gaia?
Yeah.
Gaia is the feminine force, the feminine, self-organized, creative energy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, great. Jan, do you want to ask the next?
Yeah, we'll change a little bit of the direction, going more towards food systems. And well, we have courses around each of the dimensions about sustainability dimensions, the ecological, worldview, economic, and social. And in the ecological dimension, we learn about the positive impact of local and diverse food systems. And in the economic dimension, we learn about how the economic systems are based on globalization principles. The question is, how do we keep our food local in the midst of this crazy system?
By reclaiming the economy. Because, colonialism was a commercial project. of taking resources, transforming what were the common heritage of communities into the property of the colonizer, and extracting rents. In a way, what happened with territory and land is what's going on with seed and intellectual property and patents. So the colonial commerce is a very violent, warlike phenomena, It's extraction by force. But it was elevated to be called the economy. And that's the beginning of everything going wrong. Because colonial commerce is raw, brutal exploitation. It should have been called colonial commerce. It should have been called theft. But, just like Mr. Bacon was elevated to be the father of modern science, Mr. What's his name? The one who's called the father of the modern economy, Adam Smith. Adam Smith became the father of modern economy. And I've read these books when I'm old, I've lived a lifetime. And I read Adam Smith today. I said, no, Mr. Smith, scarcity is not the beginning. It's a result of exploitation. And we are not born with competition and greed in the wombs of our mothers. He writes that in his book. So he turned predation into a natural phenomena, Mm-hmm. And when it's a very violent and artificial phenomena. And ever since then, the economy has been identified as that which assaults nature. If mechanistic science assaults nature at the knowledge level, the economy assaults nature at the level of value, And the word economy, it has two roots. It's rooted in oikos, our home. And ecology is the knowledge of our home. Economy is the management of our home based on the laws of ecology. They're supposed to be the same. They're not supposed to be in constant conflict. But because economy lost its way, it forgot the home. It forgot the earth. It forgot ecology. We have the mess that we have. But Aristotle wrote about economy, or economia he called it, as the art of living. So when you grow local food, biodiverse food ecologically, you are practicing the art of living and you're practicing economy. And you are therefore throwing a light on the non-economy or the anti-economy of globalized commerce in food systems, which is no more about feeding the world, because what's being traded is not food. What's being grown is not food. It's lost the quality of food. And therefore, to reclaim the truth of what food is in the ecological system of flows that connect us, I increasingly say food is the core currency of life, because the two principles of ecology are the hydrological cycle and the nutrition cycle. So what's a nutrition cycle? The flow of nutrition and food through the system. Yeah. So at the system's point of view, food is the currency. And that's what connects us. And every time you grow one tiny little garden and you grow one tiny little farm, you are already impacting that giant destructive system, because it's non-locality.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And yeah, and yes, that's definitely something in Gaia education courses as well, talking more and more about us all getting much more connected to our bioregions and taking responsibility in the bioregion and reclaiming ownership of that, rather than becoming more and more disconnected in the connection to the global economy. Yeah, thank you. I'll just see what this. Yes, when you are growing local food systems, you are practicing the art of life. A lot of people have really loved that statement and have said that's love. That's what it's all about. Yeah, great. And
let me just add to it. Of course, you do it, but if you have the time, you can also do the metrics, and it shows even in terms of higher quality, more food, less use of resources, zero negative impact, the system that grows food with love and care is actually the more productive and efficient system when measured in the real terms, in true cost.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it's a wonderful discovery, isn't it? That all we've been told is not true, and the abundance lies in the diversity that we can create where we are, and stepping back and letting nature take control again. Yeah. There was a specific question on this point from Noemi that I wanted to bring up, and she said that how she was asking how you feel about new food tech solutions such as lab-grown food and precision fermentation, things that are promoted as solution to our global food economy, but they aren't connected so much to what we would think of as traditional permaculture. They might be soilless production of plants, but they can be, produced en masse. Do you feel there's a place for these initiatives that are going on in the field of sustainability, or do you actually think we have to be wary of these and counterbalance that by really reconnecting?
Well, I'll speak from my learning over the last 4 decades. When food systems start to depend on external inputs, like fertilizers, like external energy, that's where everything starts to go wrong. Because the regenerative quality of living soil, of the seed, of the biodiversity, that's not allowed to play a role. In fact, it's crushed. Put fertilizers in the soil and see what happens to the mycorrhizal fungi. Put urea, sprinkle it on an earthworm and see if it lives. So an industrial system with external inputs destroys the very life of the systems that must produce food, including the life of the farmer. So the first round was synthetic chemical fertilizers, and that time they said we'll grow food from air. That was the claim of Haber-Bosch. We'll grow food from air because you are now fixing nitrogen, atmospheric nitrogen, by burning fossil fuels. No, you still needed land. In my research has shown you needed more land. And this system is so greedy and so expansive that it has to go into the Amazon and burn the forest to grow GM soya, which anyway doesn't get used as food. It goes for biofuel. It goes for animal feed. The next step was engineering the seed. Still for chemical use, Roundup Ready seeds. What were they for? So Roundup could be sold more. And this engineering of the seed was based on the assumption that the seed has nothing in it. It has no life. And I'm not saying this in a trivial way, because I've dealt with Monsanto in the courts of India, in Supreme Court of India, where they've said the seed is, like they said, soil is an empty container. They said seed is an empty container. It's what we do to the seed that gives it life and turns it to Superman. And now what basically we are being told is the farmer's head is empty. And that's why digital agriculture and all of that, and farming without farmers. So the new thinking is farming without farmers, food without farms. Farming without farmers means farming without care. Because every step at which a human being is replaced by chemicals and machines, carelessness increases. Pesticides increase, fossil fuel use increases, external use of energy increases. And if you do the graph, the more you intensify on industrial terms, the more you create externalities that are harmful. So 50% of the greenhouse gases come from the industrial system. And now they're offering lab food as a solution to the climate crisis. But this lab food will need feedstock. And Bayer, I have a report out here where I've talked about this. Bayer has actually said that as lab food gets more and more popular, we will be the only company able to produce at scale, where we will produce more and more rows of monoculture plants to provide raw materials of amino acids and protein. So food disappears. It's the end of food. Now, if ultra-processed foods are not only 20% of, packaging, processing, transport is 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions. The total is 50% from bad food systems. But the 20% of greenhouse gas emissions are also creating bad food that is making us sick. 75% chronic diseases are related to ultra-processed food. Lab food is ultra-processed food, ultra-processed food, with using 1 or 2 crops for amino acids and protein, and then adding everything synthetically, like the Impossible Burger made from GMO soya, and 14 patents related to it. Who's driving lab food? Silicon Valley, Mr. Bill Gates. What are they seeking? To give you love? Are they seeking to give you health? They're seeking profits. And profits in today's time, whether it's Silicon Valley or the buyers, is linked to patents, ownership of the very ingredients that will go into the food system. So A, it will intensify the industrial agriculture. B, it will intensify the ultra processing, which is at the root of ill health. And 3, it will intensify monopoly control. Now, I don't want my food controlled by greedy billionaires. I'd rather have my food come as a gift from the soil and a gift from the farmer. And that's why how you pose the issue of lab food and precision farming and cellular meat, etc., is put it in the context of the web of life. How does it fit in the web of life? Because if food is the currency of, the food web is the web of life. If it stops being part of the web of life and continues the polluting, degrading industrial processes that have brought us to the mess which we are, more industrial food will not solve the problem. Lab food is industrial food.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, so many insights. Thank you. One of the things that stood out and people are commenting a lot is farming without farmers is food without care. And yeah, very powerful. And we are moving towards the moment where we will open for participants to make questions, right? So Sally, anyone stood out?
Yeah, well, as a direct question resulting from what Dr. Shiva just said, Malena has asked, can Vandana make a link between these care issues with the effect on mental health? She'd like you to talk more on that.
Well, every plant needs care. Every microbe needs care. Every child needs care. Every old person needs care. And with the COVID catastrophe, we saw how, the care crisis was brought to the fore. And I was asked by Italian publishers to write a book during that time on the issue of care. So I've written a book for them called From Greed to Care. How did the edifice of greed become so naturalized? And what is the economy of care? Care is an economic phenomena because it is part of the art of living. What we call economy today is what Aristotle called the art of money making, chrematistics. Money making is not life. Money making is not care. It is violence. Yeah, it's violence not just to those from whom extraction takes place, but it's violence to society because a handful, when you make money from money, that's how the billionaires have become the billionaires they have. How is BlackRock $11 trillion in a short period after the Wall Street collapse? How? How do they make their money? Do they work? Do they give care? No, they gamble. They gamble with fictitious wealth in the financial casinos. Absence of care is what leads very often to abandonment, to mental health crisis. But even when you have a mental health problem, you need care. You need even more care. And another element related to this is, if you look at the gut microbiome, it is what is managing our neurological functions too. It is managing our brain. And so many of the new epidemics that are related to neurological decay is related to the pesticides, poisons, uniformity, GMO in our food. And there's so much research now available on this. So the link between care and mental health is we've got to avoid and prevent an absolute explosion of mental health crisis by treating people as disposable people. You know, I have worked with farmers, and we've had an epidemic of suicides in India. And, you know, I have known Indian farmers to be proud, hardworking, resilient. You know, there's a flood and they'll come back and farm again. But the economic violence of the Monsantos of the world is something they cannot fathom. And when the agents come to take their land because they are now in debt of 2 seasons, 3 seasons of GMO BT cotton, they end their lives. So the issue of care and the issue of mental health is deeply connected. And finally, I would say, giving care, giving love is the most beautiful therapy in life.
Thank you. Okay, next question. I think a few have come up. Jan, have you found one? What about NKPO, who's just come up here?
Yeah, how do we make agricultural systems not just regenerative, but also anti-fragile? That's pretty much the idea of the question. If you have also any examples of that.
Yeah, I mean, I would use the term vulnerability rather than anti-fragile. You know, life is fragile. Life is fragile. And we should be able to, you know, recognize its fragility, but life is resilient too. You know, I have here my reports. We saved seeds. We saved every seed we could. And in our seeds were climate resilient seeds. In our collections were climate resilient seeds. Seeds that can tolerate salt after the cyclones, can tolerate floods, drought tolerant seeds. So resilience is what we have to cultivate. And regeneration is based on resilience, because monocultures have no resilience. Chemical monocultures have no resilience at all. First, because chemically grown plants are more vulnerable to pests. That's why you use more pesticides. But if all you have is a monoculture, just an excess rain or a little less rain, you can have a total crop failure. Whereas biodiversity and diversity is the organizing principle for resilience. And in Navdanya, which means 9 seeds, on our farm, we see you could have heavy rain, but our systems of biodiverse cultivation of 9 crops, 12 crops, 7 crops, they never fail. So to increase resilience means increase diversity. And within the diversity that we have, select and grow more of the varieties that are anyway resilient, and then feed the soil. Feed the soil, because healthy soil makes healthy plants and resilient plants.
Yeah. Wonderful. I wonder if we can squeeze in one more question quickly before we ask you to finish with some final thoughts. Jayashri has said that many erstwhile farmers lost their lands in the hopes of finding jobs in urban settings. So there is no land holding available to so many. And he says, how can we encourage more shared land ownership and community farming that goes beyond the urban-rural divide?
Well, you know, property in land is part of colonialism. I think it's 1783 or something, as recent as that Lord Cornwallis declared the land of India the property of England. And that's how they extracted rents. And that's how they took $45 trillion out of India. And India, which used to be 30% of the world's economy, was reduced to 2%, and we became poor. But our farmers, from whom the rents were extracted, had to pay with their lives. 40 to 60 million farmers and peasants died because of famines created by this extractive greed. So I believe that everything vital to life is a commons and should be shared. That's why I started community seed banks. And I refuse to accept, A, that Monsanto invents a seed, and seed is a machine. No, they don't. Seed is autopoietic, seed is self-evolutionary, self-organized. But farmers have bred seed. So farmers are breeders. And Therefore, we create these community seed banks to reclaim seed as a commons. And I feel very grateful that at the time when Monsanto had announced and the corporations had announced that all seed would be theirs by the year 2000, and no farmer would have any seed that was not genetically modified and not patented. Today we have seeds that are not GMOs and not patented across the world, and the movement to save seeds is growing. The movement to reclaim land as a commons is also growing. The indigenous people's struggle is precisely that. The indigenous Americans' land back movement is precisely that. But I personally believe, I've given talks and because I debated Bayer once, soon after they'd taken over Monsanto. And they said, the reason our technologies are needed is because no one wants to farm. And so only our farming without farmers, digital agriculture will work. And so I asked the hall, I said, if you could farm, how many of you would farm? 90% of the hall's hands went up. And what is coming in the way? Access to land. Why is Mr. Gates the biggest farmland owner of America? Whether it's for solutions to climate change through carbon offsets or biodiversity offsets or different forms of land grab, there's a new enclosures of the land taking place. And we need a new reclaiming of the commons, of the land, of the seed, of the water, of the atmosphere, of knowledge, of health. And that's our work over the next few decades.
Yeah. Beautifully summarized. Thank you. And maybe that is where to finish, because it leaves us on this really exciting note that we can suddenly discover our power all together, the oneness rather than the 1%, as you talk about so much, and bioregional activities working together and recreating the commons. So thank you. That's an absolutely beautiful way to finish.
Thank you, and greetings to all of you, and lots of love. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you so much. We've had loads of lovely comments of gratitude coming online. I'm so sorry we didn't get to do all of your questions, but do keep talking about it on the forum. And we will send you a link to this webinar if you have registered with us, so that you can watch it over again and maybe think a bit more about what Dr. Shiva has said. So yes, lots of thank yous coming in. Jan, do you have any final words you want to say?
No, just love. Just
understood. Thank you, Vandana.
Thank you, Jan.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time, because I know how late it is there. So we hope we can leave you to rest now.
And I'll remember to send you the course announcement for September. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yes, okay, I'll make sure we pass that on to everybody. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thanks so much, everybody. And do write in the forum your comments about the webinar, and keep talking to us. We're going to be setting up an alumni platform for more conversations and more chats about what we can do working all together. So do keep in touch with us, and we'll keep the conversation going. Okay. Thanks so much, and goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Become part of the change towards a regenerative future. Our aim is to promote self-empowerment and educate our course participants about regeneration, so that people all over the world can redesign their communities. Look deeper inside our programs and courses to find your way within your community to transform the world. Sustainability is at the heart of all of our courses and projects. Sustainability design education is our mission. Join our programs, support us, and let's fly together.